This is your Irish Diary, presenting the romance and reality of Irish life then and now. Auric Éireann, or Irish Diary, is presented by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation of St. Paul. Professor John McKiernan of the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul is writer and narrator.
Emblems are fascinating, and this is one of the most fascinating of them all. This emblem has a close association with the rebirth of a nation. Our 18th century friend, the inimitable Dr. Johnson, listed among the interesting definitions of his famous dictionary the word hurling, and he defined it as a game played by wild Irishmen with sticks. Now, I don't know whether that was quite complimentary or not. After all, we must remember it was an Irish college that gave Dr. Johnson his first doctorate. At any rate, I hope you're in the mood today to listen to a little information about a very ancient game, an Irish game, the game of hurling, and the part that it played in the modern history of the new Ireland. I'm very much indebted to Father Moran, to Father Moran, for the loan of an instructional film that he prepared. I should like to show you this now. It begins, you see, with the selection of the wood for hurleys, H-U-R-L-E-Y-S. The wood must be very special. The grain must be followed. You'll be able to note the shape of the stick, which hereafter I shall probably call by its proper name, caman. You see it there, spelled before you did. Now, you see, the stick must be made of ash. Ash, Irish ash, is the most supple, the most flexible wood that can be used for this particular stick. It is shaped to follow the grain. Generally, the general wish, at any rate, is to use trees that are about 10 years old. They have the greatest amount of elasticity, and they have grown enough so as to provide a proper number of sticks of the best quality. I said I would call them camans, didn't I? Now you see the caman has a slightly curved base. Isn't it nice to see an old man passing on his skills and his observations to the younger ones? And the boys who are present at this operation, I'm sure, are getting a feeling for the tradition. The stick is going to carry a ball as a man runs down the field. It's going to hit a ball while the ball is in the air. It's going to hit a ball on the ground. It's going to be used to interfere with another man's blow. The stick must take a great deal of punishment. The ash trees are specially grown for this purpose, and when they're about 10 years old, are cut and shaped from about 4 feet above the ground to the root. I should remark that the root itself is pulled up out of the ground. Well, the boys have their hurleys and they've seen them made, and there's a wild scramble out in the field now. But soon this will be turned into an instruction, and the various plays will be demonstrated. Not that we can show you them all, but we'll show you some of them. This particular film was prepared specifically to instruct these young lads. Now, even the holding, just as you have to hold your golf clubs in a certain way, the holding of the caman is so important. There's a little fellow starting young. And the ball, which is called a slither, receives its proper attention, the proper way to strike it. And here are some of the older boys, the secondary school lads, giving a bit of demonstration too. Now here is the foundation, as we have on the screen, the basic strokes in hurling. Notice the wrist action, the correct way it says here to use the caman. Notice the twist of the wrist. There's a great deal of wrist action in this. In fact, you will find when a game is mounted that you are looking at one of the fastest games in the world. At this moment, we're simply practicing our strokes. In a few moments, you will see these employed on the field. The film, of course, was prepared in Irish. It is used in a number of schools, but chiefly the schools of the Christian Brothers. These are some of the most famous educators in Ireland, and they have done a great deal for the promotion of the Irish language. Now you see we're getting a swifter use of that. Now it's necessary here to use this hurley, the caman. Notice what it can do with the ball now. Notice the wrist action, the flexibility, and look at those muscles. We ought to remind you that although these games are attended by as many as 85,000 people in the city of Dublin, that the players in all cases are amateurs. Now the ball, this is your first opportunity to have seen the ball. Did you see that? Picking it up as you run and balancing it on the caman. There are many ways of picking up the ball. This little lad has got some of them down quite well. I think we'll have an opportunity to see him run with it. You see that? It requires an extraordinary amount of skill, particularly in coordination. There's a coordination of foot, of hand, of eye. One must be able to do a number of very demanding things when he's running. Now, this game is what we might call the national game of Ireland. We have in the great Irish saga of Cuchulainn, I'm sure that many of you, through the modern poetry of Yeats and through other men like the Irish dramatists like Synge and others, that you have heard of the ancient Irish warrior Cuchulainn. Well, in the saga that deals with Cuchulainn, we read of his hurling on his way to visit the king. Now, this ball is driven to go, if possible, between the goalposts and under the goalpost. It's not necessary. If it goes over the crossbar, then it counts as a point, but not as a goal. There are generally about 15 people on, I shouldn't say generally, there are 15 people on each side. The ball can be picked up and can be struck while it's in the air or on the ground. Watch this pickup. Right over the goal. The goalie, of course, must try to stop it. Now we're going to show you some more of these action shots of the students getting their instructions. And you'll be able to observe the younger ones at play. They're profiting, we hope, from the examples and take to it, as the proverbial expression is, like a duck to water. Now that was a nice goal driven right through, you see, but blocked. Notice how swift. The game is a combination of, it would seem at any rate to be a combination of hockey and baseball, and there are some aspects of it that remind us of the dribbling in basketball. Notice when that is hit, just as it bounces off the ground, it is struck a blow. Now, that was a good one, wasn't it? Here comes another. Smash into it again. There we are. Now, a proper grip, or catching it in mid-air and hurling it on again. The object of the game, of course, is to drive it to your own goal post. In doing this, you may block the other man. You may catch the ball if you can from mid-air and strike it back, run with it a distance, balancing it on the end of your caman, which is quite a trick. I think if you see a little of it, you'll see exactly what we mean. As we started to say before, this is the national game of Ireland, along with other games like handball and Gaelic football. These three in particular, hurling, Gaelic football, and handball, are the three games that are chiefly promoted by the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association. This organization was founded in 1884 with the purpose of reinvigorating the Irish national life by bringing back the games that had long associations with Irish history. Well, we're back to demonstrating before our young men. They've been waiting very patiently. And I think it's a joy ever to see the young grasp something from traditional instruction, master it, and pass it on themselves. This is a game that requires very little in the way of equipment, but it requires the utmost in all kinds of skill. It's not expensive, therefore, but it certainly is demanding. Now, this deals with the lanuntas, that is the follow-through. The follow-through of the caman is what helps the ball give it direction. Well, this is familiar to us all from various other games, of course. Well, now, if we have anything in the way of an athletic interest or any other kind of skills interest, I think we'll watch these scenes here with a great deal of attention. Notice how he's blocked. This is what I said, the caman must take a great deal of abuse. You see how it's blocked there? The other man, you interfere with his blow, and of course you keep your body out of it if you can. Well, now we are watching a championship game. This is a game in Croke Park, Dublin. The teams, as I said, there are no professionals. These are all amateur teams, but that doesn't mean, of course, that they don't have an extraordinary amount of skill and training and devotion to their game and to their flag. This is identified with Ireland in their mind for the reasons that I hope soon to be able to tell you. Here, then, is no longer an instructional game, but this is the real thing. Before a crowd of 85,000 people, cheering either for Dublin or Tipperary, these are the opposing teams, cheering their hearts out. 85,000 people crowding these bleachers. This happens to be one of the largest stands and athletic parks in Europe. It's named after an archbishop, Archbishop Croke, who was the first patron of the Gaelic Athletic Association. We'll have more to explain about him and the history of the association in a few moments. We might mention that one of these stands, the one directly opposite you now, is cantilevered 40 feet out without any under support, of course, cantilevered out, and will hold 4,000 people. It's quite an engineering feat. Well, you see, this game is quite fast. The ball picked up like that. Now look at the blocking, you see, and nonetheless right out over his head, but picked up by someone else, driven back and over the goal, and there we are. The flag waving means that we have made our goal. Now, you have watched excerpts, both the training of young people and the performance of devoted amateurs. You have watched one of the world's fastest games, played, if you're interested in statistics, played on 4 out of 5 of the continents today, although, of course, it's played more in Ireland than anywhere else. I mentioned the amateur status. The Gaelic Athletic Association happens to be the strongest amateur athletic association in the world. We'll leave that for another time. You can investigate that for yourselves. But this organization is able to mount a national series of competitions on all levels right up to the ultimate championship, and then even international competitions with teams in Ireland and England particularly. Although there are Gaelic athletic teams playing in Rhodesia and Australia, nonetheless the strongest export strength is in either England or New York. There are some teams playing in Chicago and Philadelphia and San Francisco too. Well, this is, as I say, the strongest athletic association of amateur standing in the world. All of this is done without professional salaried employees and so on. But why do I emphasize amateur? Well, you and I know that if things are done in an amateur way, they're done out of love. They're done voluntarily, voluntas in Latin, the will. They're done from the will. And therein lies our story for this particular program. Because the voluntary nature of their devotion is an example of something spiritual, if you will, associated with athletics. It's the spirit of these people, and this spirit has helped in bringing about the freedom of Ireland in the 20th century. Now, I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, have visited Ireland, and those of you who haven't, well, you probably will someday. And if you go to the General Post Office in Dublin, you will notice in the large interior, in the middle, in the center of that open space, you will notice a statue to this Irish warrior, Cuchulainn, who represents, you see, the spirit of modern Ireland, the warrior spirit. Now, this game, hurling, made Cuchulainns of Irishmen in the 19th and the 20th century. It brought them out of their farms and out of their fisheries and made warriors of them. It was part of that vast attempt that was participated in by the whole country in so many different ways, in literature, in drama, in sports, and so on, in military and economic fronts also, but part of that vast attempt to recapture the golden past of Ireland that had been free before the Anglo-Norman invasions of the end of the 12th century. Of course, having visited Ireland, you realize there are monuments on all sides to remind Irishmen of their great past and of the antiquity of the country. Monuments that go back before the time of Christ. Now, these people, however, in the 19th century had reached a rather low level of national spirit. They had been beaten down so much, so very, very much, that they seemed to be without heart at all. There was a Young Ireland movement, as it was called, in the middle, just at the mid-period, the 1848 period, which had erupted into a precipitous revolt against England, and this was quashed, with the result, you see, that the national spirit from that time to the end of the century was rather timid. Now, Cardinal MacRory, only one of the many voices speaking out, trying to put stamina into the Irish, trying to put backbone, if you will, suggested, he said, "It seems that the time-honored games of their forefathers ought to have the first call upon our Irish youth." He was talking of the game of hurling, for instance. And we have here, I'd like to read a brief excerpt from an English traveler of that time, Mrs. Hall, who remarked, "The great game in Kerry and throughout the South is the game of hurley, a rather rare, although not unknown, game in England. It is a fine manly exercise with sufficient of danger to produce the game of the peasantry of Ireland. To be an expert hurler, a man must possess athletic powers of no ordinary character. He must have a quick eye, a ready hand, and a strong arm. And he must be a good runner, a skillful wrestler, and withal patient as well as resolute. Now, Mrs. Hall and other English travelers noticed the popularity of the game, but they weren't able indeed to realize that, like all other expressions of Irish nationality, it seemed to be in danger of death. Cardinal MacRory spoke this challenge, and he, indeed, I'm not trying to give him credit for initiating the game, but his opinion only echoed and spurred and developed throughout the country, and on all sides we began to get individual men interested in the national games. So that in 1884, on a Saturday, November 1st, in the town of Thurles in Tipperary, at Hayes Hotel, an historic meeting took place. 7 men under the secretaryship of Michael Cusick, a teacher who had been teaching, a man who had been teaching in Dublin. Michael Cusick and 6 others brought into being the Gaelic Athletic Association for the purpose of fighting, if you will, the inundation, or opposing the inundation of foreign games. All things foreign were sweeping over the country, and games were only one of these elements. So Michael Cusick brought into being the Gaelic Athletic Association for the purpose of competing successfully with cricket, for instance, and other games that represented the ties of the country with England. Now, the movement to develop hurling and football spread quite rapidly, and within a year a team was able to leave Ireland and come to New York City to play a game here. However, there were some setbacks at home. I think it's quite interesting to remark about the history of one of these hurlers, a very famous man, a man by the name of Nally from the west of Ireland, who, like Cusick, as a matter of fact, Cusick remarked that Nally was the man who gave him the most practical and helpful encouragement in this effort. Nally was a great man for the revival of the games, but, and here's the association I'm going to develop, he was also a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. In other words, the people who were interested in the freeing of Ireland through military means, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, they realized that the national games would contribute to the national spirit, and therefore they infiltrated, if you will, they at least determined that they too would assist, would help in the development of the national games movement. Nally was one of these men, himself a great athlete, indeed known internationally for his athletic powers. But the police, who were then, remember, under the direction of the English state, the police realized soon that the Fenians, as the rebels were called, were making use of the Gaelic Athletic Association. And Nally was ultimately tried and sentenced to 10 years in prison. I'd like to read the words of the charge. He was charged with purchasing and procuring rifles, revolvers, pistols, guns, ammunitions, and explosives for supplying to evilly disposed persons for the purpose of waging war and depriving Her Majesty Queen Victoria of that part of her realm called Ireland, and setting up therein a republic. Well, now that wasn't very nice of him. And the Gaelic Athletic Association in general came under this suspicion. Was it a fair suspicion? I'm afraid it was, because the national ferment that was being developed here, I don't mean that every hurler was a rebel, but that national ferment was contributing to the development of a rebel spirit. And some of the young Irelanders themselves, to go back a few years before the founding of the GAA, some of the young Irelanders themselves, when they were short of rifles, had drilled with camans. And even in 1916, James Connolly had drilled his Irish citizen army with camans. And now to go back a few years to the 1890s, when Parnell, you remember that great name? When Parnell died, 2,000 men marched to his funeral carrying camans draped in black. So you see, the caman and the hurling soon was swept up into the whole system of the whole developing system of a nationalism in Ireland. This was the contribution that the Gaelic Athletic Association was to make. Patrick Pearse, you may recall his name in association with the 1916 revolution. Patrick Pearse said, "I am certain when it comes to a question of winning battles, her main reliance, that is Ireland's main reliance, must be on her hurlers." And then he said to the young students, you remember he was a schoolmaster before he was the general, the commandant of the Irish Republic in 1916, he said, "To your camans, O boys of Banba." Well, now that is some of the romance and some of the truth of the associations between that emblem which you saw at the beginning of this program, between that emblem and the founding of the modern Irish Republic. The hurling matches and the hurlers themselves were imbued or helped to develop that spirit of nationalism. Now, those boys, as we have them today, for instance, in every school in Ireland, our teams, our hurling teams, those boys now look forward not to a period of revolution, certainly, because Ireland has achieved its freedom, but they are listening to the call of Alfred Murray, the present president of the GAA, who has said in what we might call, in the cliche, clarion tones, who has said then in his call to the nation, the GAA must participate in the building of the nation now, and perhaps on the social front in a way that it has never before attempted. So the GAA played its part in producing the free republic of the 20th century. It is now being called upon by its present president to take a lead in helping Ireland solve some of its social problems, in binding together the nation, north and south, united and disunited, one class and another class. And it's quite likely that it will do this. If you were ever to attend one of these hurling matches in Dublin or one of the other Irish cities and see the tremendous enthusiasm, indeed listen to the tremendous enthusiasm generated, you would understand how the GAA can do that.
If you would like a list of selected readings to add to your enjoyment, please send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Professor John McKiernan, College of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota. This program has been presented as a public service by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation and produced at KTCA TV, Minneapolis, St. Paul.